Welcome, Dr. Kafatos, again. Last time we met.
Good to see you.
Last time we met was
a long time ago, right?
And now we meet again in Dorm,
right.
Netherlands.
Right.
And it's really wonderful to see you.
Same here.
And your first YouTube interview was well received, even in England. And,
thank you.
And that is what inspired me to do a second one. And in my heart of hearts, I believe you have the most balanced and proper view, in my opinion, how the whole science of consciousness studies should, in which direction it should go.
I appreciate your kind words.
I really mean that.
Okay.
Now, in your abstract this time in Netherlands, at this conference of SAN 2012, you talk about consciousness, nature of the self, and also nature of the observer. And you say these three play a central role. And what amazes me is how did you come to that conclusion? As these three actually point towards
the observer, the self, and the act of observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They point towards the last, if you like, frontiers.
Sure. The self is, of course, a term that is heavily used.
Yeah. Especially in Eastern philosophy.
Especially in Eastern philosophy, and so we probably need to define it a little bit. The observer is more familiar to us from the science of measurement, or the measurement theory of quantum theory, where the act of observation is very, very crucial. And of course, the act of observation is that interaction between the observed system and the observer.
Right.
Now, the self is a more deeper and fundamental principle, I'll call it principle, although it is our very nature.
And would you say that's principle of awareness?
It is the awareness that with objects and without objects.
Okay.
And so the two, of course, are closely related, although I would say that observation from the scientific point of view is a way perhaps to get us to issues about the self in a scientific way, and not just in the traditional metaphysical way, which of course by itself is also very good. So we have a way to perhaps start having a dialogue between science and metaphysics through the observer and the self.
Yeah. I'm glad you split that into two. It's amazing.
It's split, but in reality, ultimately, they are the same. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
It's just the observer is one aspect of the self.
Yeah.
That we can speak of it in terms of scientific terms.
Okay. Yeah. Right. And how does the consciousness tie into this self and the observer?
So the consciousness, if we take some of the Eastern Vedantic tradition or the Shaivite tradition, consciousness, which they call the self, or Atman or Paramatman, all these terms are equivalent. They're not the same again, but the Atman is individual self, and Paramatman is a universal self. It's the self is a consciousness itself.
Okay.
So now in the West, when we say consciousness, we usually mean conscious of something, an object. I am conscious of this little notebook, or I'm conscious of you. I'm conscious of the table here. I'm conscious of the sun. So usually it is assumed to be conscious of an object. However, consciousness, or the self, is even more general than that, because we can have states of consciousness with no objectified awareness.
Okay.
And so, if you like, consciousness is awareness, and then we can call it self-consciousness or object consciousness.
I get it. Okay.
But really, object awareness. So these terms are
interchangeable,
and we have to be very careful,
because it can cause confusion.
Not only to cause confusion, but we can become bound by them. We become bound by our own ideas, and in these they say that your own words can bind you, and you cannot escape. Your own thoughts can bind you. So as long as you understand that self is maybe the fundamental underlying existence of being, but it's also active and dynamic and conscious. And that when we talk about awareness in the West, we mean perhaps awareness that has to do with the brain, and consciousness. I use it in the same way as the self. So it's individual consciousness and universal consciousness, and it can be with objects or without objects.
Okay. Now, second question is, this act of observation, plays a very central role. Now, in your abstract, you mentioned, I don't know whether this is your view or not, but no quantum properties exist without the act of observation.
It's my view, but I'm certainly not the first one to have said that. It's, of course, a great long line of famous physicists, starting with basically Bohr and Heisenberg, the so-called Copenhagen interpretation. It was put in those particular terms in such a succinct way by John Archibald Wheeler, a great physicist who is also the father of the black holes. So John Archibald Wheeler said that no phenomenon is a phenomenon without being observed phenomenon.
Okay. Now, I remember reading where Einstein said, I'm not very comfortable with that idea. That
yes.
If I'm not looking at the moon doesn't exist. I mean,
correct.
What,
Einstein, although it's a little bit of dichotomy, or a little bit of an interesting history to study, because he, of course, did a lot, probably as much as others, to begin the theory of quantum theory, to lay the foundations of quantum theory, but then turned against it and fought for the rest of his life, the last 30 or 40, 35 years of his life, trying to get away from quantum theory, because he didn't like the idea that the universe is context-based or observation-based. So he believed in an objective reality that exists without conscious observation. Of course, what he was talking, and probably he was, I don't want to say the word confused, because it's difficult to say that about Einstein, but perhaps, again, it was mixing the idea of a human awareness of something compared to perhaps the underlying universal consciousness. So he was talking about, well, do you really believe that the moon is not there when no one is observing it? Well, how do you know? That's the first counter answer. How would you know if nobody observed it? How would you know whether it's there?
Subjectively, it looks a bit odd, doesn't it? I mean, I know it's there, right? But you say that it's not there just because they're not observing it.
Sure, but actually, if you start following that line of reasoning, you will realize, and this is what the quantum physicists that follow the Copenhagen interpretation, as revised by John von Neumann, which is probably the most modern version of quantum theory, would say that, well, how did you know? That would be a simple, practical thing. How do you know if no one is observing it? Then the question is meaningless. But actually, we know more than that. In terms of these measurement theories, we know that until an act of observation takes place, for example, the spin quantity that an electron or even a quantum system, a spin does not have a definite value until it is measured, and therefore Heisenberg would say that the idea of spin without the observation is meaningless. You can't say that. There's something there, but the actual values that it takes depends on the act of observation.